When I arrived for my wife's birthday dinner, no one was there. I called her and she said, "Oh, you weren't supposed to find out like this." Then I heard a man whisper, "Did he hang up?" I drove straight to her office and found her in the conference room wearing her anniversary dress. Not with me. My name is Royce. I'm 47 years old, living in Spokane, Washington, and I've worked as a mechanical engineer at the same company for nearly 20 years. My life, for the most part, followed a quiet, predictable rhythm. Wake up early, make my own coffee, pack lunch, head to work, come home, eat dinner with my wife, Felina, and then either read or nod off in front of the TV. We didn't have children, though not for lack of trying. After 2 miscarriages in the early years of our marriage, we simply stopped talking about it. Over time, it became this silent agreement between us that we would just be the two of us and our dog, Benny, who we got as a pup from a local rescue 10 years ago. Felina and I had been married for 15 years. She was beautiful in a soft, understated way. Kind eyes, a soft laugh that came out like wind chimes in summer, and she always wore red lipstick, even on the most mundane days. She worked as a communications director at a real estate development firm downtown. Her job often required her to attend evening meetings or corporate events, and though that had become more frequent over the past year, I didn't think much of it. October arrived with its usual chill, and Felina's birthday was around the corner. I decided to plan a surprise dinner at Clinkerdagger, her favorite restaurant overlooking the Spokane River. It has been our go-to spot for anniversaries and special occasions. I made the reservation 2 weeks in advance, ordered a bouquet of her favorite flowers, and picked out a card that simply read, "To many more years of us." I even ironed a shirt that I rarely wore anymore. I shaved that afternoon, something I didn't do often these days, and I left the house early to make sure everything was perfect. At 7:05 p.m., I arrived at the restaurant. The table was ready, flowers perfectly arranged in a vase, candle flickering, the view of the water sparkling beneath the dim light. I waited. 5 minutes turned into 10, then 20. I checked my phone and saw no missed calls, no messages. I texted her once, lightly. "Hey, everything okay? I'm here." No response. At 7:31, I decided to call her. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Her voice came through, airy and uncertain. "Royce." I felt a twinge of confusion. "Yeah, where are you? We had dinner tonight." There was a pause, then a quiet. "Oh, you weren't supposed to find out like this." The words didn't make sense at first. My mind tried to decode them as if they were jumbled. Then I heard it barely, but unmistakable. A male voice in the background. Did he hang up? I didn't answer. I simply ended the call. The silence in the restaurant felt thunderous after that. The candle flickered and sputtered. My reflection in the window looked pale and unfamiliar. My heartbeat pounded behind my ears. Without thinking much, I stood, left a 20 on the table, and walked out. I drove without music, my hands clenched so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles went white. Her office wasn't far, just 15 minutes. I pulled into the nearly empty lot and sat there for a second, breathing hard. There were lights still on inside. I walked in through the glass doors, my footsteps echoing through the empty lobby. The security guard wasn't at the desk. The elevator ride up felt agonizingly slow. Her floor was quiet, but one conference room light was still on. The blinds were half drawn, but enough for me to see movement inside. I pushed the door open. There she was, Felina, in the red dress she wore on our 10th anniversary, the one we had specially made during a weekend trip to Leavenworth. She stood with her back to me, holding a glass of wine. She turned when she heard the door, and her eyes went wide. Damon, her boss, stood beside her, frozen like a deer in headlights. He held a second glass of wine. Felina stepped forward, a hand to her mouth. "Royce," I didn't wait. I turned and walked out before the rage inside me did something irreversible. That night, I didn't go home. I parked in a Safeway parking lot on the other side of town. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I stared at the ceiling of my truck for hours, hearing the words over and over again. "You weren't supposed to find out like this." In the following days, I ignored her calls, her texts, everything. I told my boss I was taking some time off, and he didn't ask questions. I walked for miles some days, around the neighborhood, along the river, through parks. I tried to outpace the burning in my chest, but it never worked. Eventually, I agreed to meet her. She begged to explain, and I let her, not because I wanted to hear her excuses, but because I needed to see her face when she said them. We met at a small diner near her office. She looked tired, older somehow, like the lie had aged her. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she said, staring at her untouched coffee. "It started as work dinners." He listened to me in ways I felt you hadn't in a long time. "How long?" I asked, my voice even. She blinked hard, then looked up at me. 6 months. 6 months. That was longer than just a mistake. That was a choice. Repeatedly made. "We were broken, Royce," she said. "You just didn't want to admit it." Maybe she was right. Maybe I had stopped seeing the cracks. Maybe I mistook her silence for peace when it was just distance growing. I left without another word. A week later, her sister, Gemma, called me. I hadn't spoken to Gemma in years, not since her wedding. She was crying. Felina had collapsed at work and was rushed to the hospital. Liver failure. Autoimmune hepatitis. Apparently, she had known for months but hadn't told anyone. The stress and guilt had worsened it. I didn't know how to react. Part of me thought it was a ploy, a consequence of her actions catching up with her. But another part of me, a bigger part, still remembered the woman I had loved for years. I drove to the hospital, not knowing what I would say or do. Seeing her there, pale, wires and tubes everywhere, my anger softened, even if only a little. She looked small, fragile, like someone who had been running from something too big to outrun. "I'm sorry," she said when she saw me. I thought I was dying, and all I could think about was how much I ruined. I sat beside her, didn't speak, just sat. After she was discharged, I helped her get settled at her sister's place. We didn't talk about reconciliation. We both knew the damage was too deep. I filed for divorce. She didn't fight it. In the months that followed, I went to therapy. I didn't do it for her. I did it because I needed to make sense of how I let myself fade in my own life. I needed to understand how two people could live in the same house and drift so far apart without ever raising their voices. I found the answers in memories I hadn't visited in years, missed dinners, silences that went on too long, the way we both avoided hard conversations. It wasn't just cheating. That was the final blow. But the marriage had been bleeding out long before Damon showed up. I sold the house. Took only what mattered, some books, a few photos, and Benny, who was still loyally at my heels. He slowed down a lot, his muzzle gray, but he stayed by me like a heartbeat. One night, I sat on the porch of a rental cabin I'd gotten in Montana. The stars were sharp and bright, the kind of sky you only see when there's nothing else around. I lit a fire, poured a glass of bourbon, and opened a journal I'd been carrying for weeks. I wrote down everything. The restaurant, the phone call, the hospital, the silence, the pain. It didn't fix anything, but it gave shape to the chaos. That's where I am now. Not fixed, not whole, but not broken anymore either. The Montana air was sharp and still. Out there, with nothing but the rustling trees and the occasional howl of wind brushing through the branches, things felt a little more manageable. I stayed at that cabin longer than I'd planned. What was meant to be a 3-day escape turned into almost 2 weeks. Every morning, I brewed coffee on the old stovetop and sat out on the deck with Benny. He loved it out there. Sniffed the cold air like it was something brand new. In the quiet, I started to listen more carefully to my own thoughts, to the pieces of my life I had buried under the concrete of routine. I thought back to those early years with Felina, before the job titles, the bills, the miscarriages, and the silence. I remembered our tiny apartment near Gonzaga University where we used to sleep on a mattress on the floor and eat ramen with chopsticks, because we thought it made things more authentic. We used to laugh more. I remember the way she would dance barefoot in the kitchen when her favorite song came on. God, I hadn't thought about that in years. We lost each other somewhere between comfort and disappointment. Somewhere in the stretch of life where familiarity becomes distance. We stopped trying to impress one another. Stopped asking the deep questions. Maybe she gave up first, or maybe I did. Maybe we both did, quietly, hoping the other one would notice and pull us back. Back in Spokane, after returning from Montana, I started to clean the house both literally and metaphorically. I donated furniture we had picked out together. Gave away kitchen gadgets still in boxes. Went through closets and sorted what to keep and what to let go of. I found a box of letters in the attic, notes we had written to each other during our first year of marriage. Some were silly, others tender. There was one where she had written, "Promise me we'll always be this way, even when life gets messy." I sat on the floor of that attic and read it over and over again until the words blurred. I kept that one. I didn't hear from Felina for a while. After the divorce was finalized and she moved to Bend to be closer to her sister, I figured that was it. A chapter closed. Occasionally, Gemma would send me updates through text, things like, "Felina's responding well to treatment," or "She started painting again." I never replied, but I appreciated them. It was strange, loving someone and knowing you can't be with them. It wasn't just betrayal that severed us. It was the 1,000 paper cuts that came before. One morning, I was sitting at the counter of a little breakfast joint near my place, reading the paper. A woman a few stools down leaned over and said, "I like your dog. He's got kind eyes." Benny was lying at my feet, as always. I smiled. He's a better listener than most people I know. She chuckled and introduced herself as Ramona. She was a therapist, recently moved from Missoula after a divorce of her own. We didn't flirt, just talked. About our dogs, about weather, about how we both found comfort in eggs over medium and strong coffee. It was the first conversation I had with someone new that didn't feel forced or exhausting. Over the weeks, I started visiting that diner more often. Sometimes she was there, sometimes not. Eventually, we exchanged numbers. Not romantically, at least not at first. It was just someone to talk to who didn't look at me like a wounded man or an abandoned husband. She asked about my story in pieces. Never pushed. Just let me give her chapters when I am ready. I found myself opening up more than I expected. One night, during a particularly rainy evening, I found myself on the porch again, Benny curled beside me, listening to the soft tap of water on the wooden beams. My phone buzzed with a message from Ramona. I think sometimes the storm comes not to break us, but to wash away what's been clinging to us for too long. I stared at the message for a while. Felina once said something like that during our first year of marriage, after our first real argument. We were standing in the kitchen, exhausted and defensive, and she said, maybe fighting isn't the end. Maybe it's a way to clean the air between us. I didn't understand it then. I don't think I truly did until now. Fall turned into winter. The holidays came and went. I didn't visit my family that year. My folks live in Idaho, and while they had heard bits and pieces about what happened, I hadn't told them everything. My mother tried to get me to come home, but I wasn't ready to be the center of hushed conversations and sympathetic glances. I stayed in Spokane, decorated a small tree for myself and Benny, bought him a new blanket and a toy shaped like a moose. We spent Christmas morning with a fire burning and holiday music playing softly in the background. It wasn't joyful, but it was enough. On New Year's Eve, I found myself back at Clinker Dagger, not at our old table, but at the bar. I ordered a drink, tipped the bartender well, and quietly toasted myself. To survive, to pain, to move forward. I didn't make any resolutions. I didn't need to. Life was already changing, and I was changing with it. The months after the new year felt oddly weightless, like I was floating just above my life, watching it play out without rushing to grip it too tightly. That was new for me. I was the kind of man who once measured my day in small, reliable anchors. Coffee at 6:15, traffic at 7 o'clock, meetings at 9:30, and home by 5:45. The predictability used to feel like safety. Now, it just felt like distance. Therapy helped more than I expected it would. I had resisted it at first, convinced that what I needed was time, not talk. But the silence had started to feel like a heavy coat I couldn't shrug off. My therapist, Monica, was soft-spoken and thoughtful, never pushed me further than I wanted to go. She asked more questions about me than about Felina. That surprised me. But slowly, I began to understand why. She asked about when I last felt joy. Real joy. I had to think for a long time. I said something about a road trip to Oregon we'd taken 8 years ago, before things got serious and heavy. We camped by the coast and slept in a cheap tent that kept collapsing in the wind. I remembered Felina laughing so hard she couldn't breathe, rain dripping off her nose, her red lipstick smeared like a child's crayon drawing. We were soaked, cold, and completely broke, but we were happy. Monica just nodded and said, "That's a moment you carried with you." I didn't realize how much I had packed away in the corners of my mind until I started unpacking it one memory at a time. Ramona and I kept talking. Still nothing romantic. Just a growing friendship made of check-ins and warm coffee and shared silences. She told me about her ex, a musician who fell more in love with applause than with her. About how she used to cry in her car during lunch breaks, hiding her pain behind makeup and polite smiles. I told her about the attic, about the letter I kept, and about the time I almost left but didn't, and how I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had. One afternoon, I drove out to the lake where Felina and I used to go during summers. It was half frozen now, the sky stretched wide and gray. I stood on the old dock where we once carved our initials into the wood. I ran my fingers over them. The letters were still there, faint and aged, like ghosts pressed into timber. I didn't cry. I just stood there until the cold made my fingers numb. That night, I wrote another journal entry. I'd been filling pages steadily since Montana. I didn't go back to reread them, not yet. It wasn't about the past, it was about putting it somewhere outside of me. I started going to a small community group on Wednesday nights. Nothing religious, just people who met to talk about whatever they were dealing with. I listened more than I spoke, but hearing others share their losses, their loneliness, their small victories, it helped. One woman lost her husband and said, "Grief isn't about the missing. It's about carrying the weight of something that doesn't have a home anymore." That stayed with me. Spring has come. Spoken thought. The trees bloomed, and Benny perked up, a little more energetic with the warmer air. I planted some herbs on the windowsill of my apartment: basil, mint, and rosemary. Felina used to say every home needed something green, something alive. I didn't disagree. One Saturday, Ramona and I went to a used book sale at the library. She picked out a poetry book and handed it to me, saying, "You might like this. It's not too sentimental." I read it in 2 days. There was a line that hit me hard. We were never meant to stay unchanged. Even mountains crumble slowly. I wrote it down on a sticky note and stuck it to the fridge. I heard from Gemma again in April. Felina had responded well to her treatment. She was painting more, doing landscapes now, mostly from memory. Gemma said she kept a small photo of Benny on her nightstand. That made me pause. That night, I pulled out the box I kept in the closet. The one with the anniversary card I never gave her, the letters from our first year, and the photo of us in Glacier National Park. I looked through everything, slowly, letting the weight of it settle gently rather than hit like a wave. I put it all back when I was done, but this time, I didn't tape the box shut. I wasn't hiding it anymore. I was beginning to live alongside it. By the time summer rolled around, I had built a new routine. It wasn't rigid like before, but it had a rhythm I liked. Mornings were for long walks with Benny. Afternoons for work, I'd started consulting on engineering projects part-time, and evenings were my own. I cooked more, read more, even started writing short essays about everything I'd gone through. I didn't know if I'd ever publish them, but the act of writing felt like reclaiming something that had been buried for years. Ramona suggested I take a class at the local community center, something completely unrelated to work or therapy. I chose photography. I'd always liked the idea of capturing moments the way I wanted to remember them, not just how they happened. The instructor, a retired photojournalist named Hal, was the kind of guy who spoke with his hands and drank coffee like it was water. He taught us how to frame a shot with intention, how to find meaning in shadows and quiet expressions. Photos don't lie, he said, but they also don't tell the whole truth. That stuck with me. Near the end of the course, we were assigned a final project, something personal, something that told a story. I had an idea. It took weeks of planning. Not because it was complicated, but because it needed to be done right. I called Gemma, asked her if she thought Felina would be open to seeing me. Just once. Not to talk about the past, but to show her something. There was a pause. Then Gemma said, "She's in a better place now. I think she'd say yes." We arranged to meet at a local gallery that had a small exhibit space. I rented it out for one night. Quiet. Private. Nothing extravagant. When Felina walked in, she looked different. Thinner. More careful in her movements. But her eyes still had that thoughtful softness I remembered. She smiled politely, unsure. "Thank you for coming," I said. She looked around at the space. The lights were dimmed, and framed photos lined the walls. Her expression changed when she saw them. The first photo was of an empty chair at Clinkerdagger, the wine untouched, the candle burning low. The second was of the conference room door, cracked open, with blurred shadows inside. The third a close-up of a phone screen, the name Felina illuminated. Then came the more abstract shots. A wilted peony, a glass of spilled wine, a pair of shoes left by a doorway, a hallway drenched in golden light, empty. Each photo told a part of the story. Our story, but without words. Just silence and light. She walked slowly, studying each one. Her fingers brushed her lips a few times. She didn't speak until the very last photo, a mirror reflecting a man standing alone, half in shadow, half in light. His hand rested on the head of a dog. "That's you," she said quietly. I nodded. This is what it felt like. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't move to comfort her. "I never imagined you'd turn it into something like this," she whispered. I didn't either. But pain asks to be witnessed. She turned back to the photos. "They're beautiful. They're honest." She looked at me, then not with guilt, but with something closer to understanding. "I hope you find someone who sees you the way you see the world now," she said. "I already do," I replied, and it was true. I saw myself. I walked her to the door. She paused, turned to say something, then changed her mind. She left with grace, and for once, no ghosts followed her out. A few months later, that gallery show caught the attention of a local art collective. They asked if I'd be willing to display it as a permanent installation about loss, healing, and closure. I agreed, under one condition: no names, no backstory, just the photos. I visited once after it opened to the public. I watched as strangers walked through the exhibit, pausing at each frame, leaning in. I didn't need to be recognized. The revenge was in being seen not by her, not by Damon, but by myself. I had turned the wreckage into something that made people stop and feel. Something that couldn't be erased or denied. It was never about getting even. It was about rising beyond the point where they could ever touch me again. And that, I learned, was the most satisfying kind of revenge there is.